My next guest needs no introduction. Tula Pink has been wowing quilters with her fanciful designs for over 40 collections. And I wanted to know how she does it. Juggling lines, challenging technology, finding new products to complement her motifs, all while keeping it fresh and new. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Tula Pink. So welcome, Tula, to the show. You're coming to us from Missouri, and I understand St. Joseph is about 30 minutes from Missouri Star and 30 minutes from Quilting is My Therapy. Did you choose that place strategically?
Actually, I was here before both of those things. So I moved here about 12, 13 years ago, and then those things kind of happened later. And so it's just sort of serendipity that I'm so close to so many good things. I mean, this Kansas City area is just ripe with quilters, though. I mean, we have so much quilt knowledge in this corner of Missouri. It's kind of mind-boggling. Like Barbara Brackman lives in Kansas City, who's like a great quilt historian. You know, we have Angela Walters, an exceptionally amazing long arm quilter. We've got Amy Barrickman, Indigo Junction, and like we have a lot of quilt history in this town or in this general corner of the state, which is pretty wild.
But you're a California girl. How did you end up in Missouri?
I mean, it's kind of a long story, but my mom's sister lived here. My mom would come out to play in a charity golf tournament every year. Just the sisters all would get together. And she met a farmer, fell in love, moved to Missouri, like all kind of really quick, and had twins at 48 years old. So I had little sisters. All of a sudden, I was 26 when the twins were born. And so I was like, well, I can work from anywhere. So let me come out there. So at least the twins know me, because all of my siblings, there's 5 of us, and we're all really close. And so I was like, I want to make sure that they know their older siblings, you know? And so I came out and just never left. And then my brother joined me after college to come work with me. And we both lived here for 10 or so years now.
So at what point did you leave your day job?
I don't think in terms of years so much as fabric collections. I left about collection 3, my day job, took my savings, moved to North Carolina with a friend who was moving there to go to school. And so I was like, yeah, I'll go. I had to get a new day job pretty quick after that. I mean, fabric takes a minute to pay. Like, you know, you have to build something. It's not automatic. It's not a job with a paycheck. So you get out of it what you put into it. And that was part of moving here. You know, I moved here. I thought, you know, here I can live inexpensively and put all my effort, instead of just into surviving, into building this business. And because I can get by on so little here, as opposed to California, which is crazy pants in terms of affordability. And that's what I did. And then my brother joined me out here, and somewhere along the line, we ended up just like really liking it here. And so we've stayed. I would say it took me maybe 4 or 5 years to make a living, like a living wage, where I could just do fabric design, 10 years to feel successful at it.
So how many quilt lines are you juggling at any particular time?
At any particular time, 3 to 5 in various stages of production. So the baseline is 1 in stores, like actually in stores ready to be purchased, 1 available for retailers to purchase. So 1 on its way, shipping soon, let's say, 1 in production, and 1 on the drawing board. So that's the baseline. Once I draw it and put it out there, that's not the end of it. It's not technically my responsibility, but my business responsibility to make sure shops sell through what they've purchased and don't regret their purchases of my fabric. So we carry the line all the way to the finish in terms of support and social media and marketing. And, you know, technically, according to my contract, my job's done once I turn it in to Free Spirit to be produced. But I think that's the difference between a successful fabric designer and a not successful fabric designer, is the ones who understand that you have to carry it through. Because if that shop who purchased my collection still has it on the shelf when the new one comes in, they're not going to be nearly as inclined to buy the next one.
Yeah.
So it is, for the longevity of my career, it's important to me to support the shop all the way through to the consumer.
So that's a lot of project management. How do you keep it all organized? Like, not even just logistically, like brain wise, how do you keep your brains working on all those tracks?
Well, I'm super type A, which helps a lot. It's actually, Cameron, my brother, and I were talking about this morning. Like, everyone has their like specific personality talents. Mine is focus. I can laser focus on a thing. And I have a no multitasking policy. So I work out one thing at a time, see it all the way through, then move to the next thing. And I think that's a big part of it, is like my unwillingness to multitask allows me to focus on the thing I need to focus on. I'm super organized. I have an extensive calendar. So I know when shops are going to start getting their fabric, at what stage they're at with it. And I care a lot, which makes it easier to manage because I genuinely care about all of it.
I don't think you can do it unless you're passionate about it. Like, there's so many days when you wake up and you're tired and you need that care.
I mean, it's true. And my biggest fear has always been burnout, because this whole thing runs on my battery. So if my battery is depleted, then everything else falls away. Everything else falls apart. It's an interesting relationship because I'm an island, basically. And if my island starts to fail, then everybody moves to a new island, And so it's really kind of starts and ends with me. Cameron, who manages a lot of the marketing, and I mean, we do everything really. It's really just a two-man team, just me and my brother. And he is really, really smart about social media and marketing and all of that. So I think to work at this level on your own would be really difficult. You have to have a teammate. I mean, I'm lucky in that I have a teammate who cares as much as I do, That's huge.
So when Cameron came on board, were you already looking for help, or was it just a great coincidence?
No, it was supposed to just be like a pit stop, like he had just graduated from college and was not sure where he was going to go next. So I was like, come out here, hang out with me, help me out a little bit. And, we joke that in those early days, it was like, we worked harder at finding something to occupy ourselves because we didn't have enough work to do at the time. I mean, because when he came on, I basically had a blog that I would write on maybe once a week if I was like really on the ball, and he's been the one all along that kind of pushed me further and further out. Like, he's the one who said, you're not traveling, you're not teaching. Let's do videos once a week. I'm like, once a week? That is so often. And now it's like, I get up on Tuesday morning and I'm like, here, let's shoot this, It becomes so easy, but I wouldn't have done that without him. I would have just stayed in my little hidey hole and enjoyed that probably a lot, but
I must admit that I'm probably one of the thousands and thousands of people that look forward to Tula Tuesday. And it's funny because it comes up on my feed and go, oh, it's Tuesday. Tula's here.
Yeah, it's really funny. I mean, I thought I'd never get used to it. And now we're like, do we need to do 2 a week? And I was like, oh God, no.
I'm impressed the way that you can talk off the cuff like that. Like me, it would be so edited, all the ums and ahs, and you just...
I mean, honestly, we don't know how to edit the videos. So we don't. And this is my whole life. I can talk about it forever. I mean, Cameron's sitting behind the camera going, okay, 3, 2, 1, we're running out of time. We're running out of time. And I'm like, but I haven't showed him this bag I made yet, I mean, I can talk about fabric until I die. It'll never get old.
Well, practically with every introduction of your fabric, you mentioned something where you've pushed the limits, whether it be in pattern or color. Is that just because no one's tried to push the technology before, or you're taking advantage of new technology?
I really am trying to push the limits of like my own skills because I don't want to bore people, like I don't really want people to go, I know what's coming next, like I want people to be excited. I want people to be as excited as I am, and I want to keep myself excited. And in terms of pushing the limits of a technology that hasn't changed in a long time, it's essentially just screen printing. That's what we're doing here. It's more that with every collection, I learn more about it. And so I know how to manipulate it better. I know how to use the downfalls of the printing process in my favor. And that only comes with experience. And, 40 collections and, 2,000 fabrics down the road, I've learned a lot about how the technology operates and how the technology influences the look of the final piece. And I'm better equipped to use that to my advantage now. But the boundary pushing is largely artwork based. I just want people to be excited.
Well, you manage to excite me every time. I'm just looking. I had your
flamingos, daydreamer.
Flamingos. Like when you showed that, I must have just gone, but every time I look at it, I see new things. Like I'm always telling people to take a really good look at the fabric, pull out all the colors. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, oh my Lord, like there's some leaves in here where you have 4 colors, 5 colors, 6 colors in. The more I look at it, the more shading. The amount of effort this must have taken for you to make. I'm so impressed.
Oh, thank you.
So impressed.
I mean, I'm always trying to do more, like I feel a great responsibility to earn my audience every time. I feel really, really deeply on that level. Like I never want to coast, and I don't believe in like credit in that way. There's too much fabric in the world. Nobody's going to buy fabric just because my name's on it. If I want to keep my audience engaged, I need to earn that every single time. And so I'm constantly trying to up the ante. When I work really hard and put a lot of effort into something, that's my way of saying thank you to everybody who's continued to stick with me and buy my fabrics and love my fabrics and trade my fabrics and make things out of my fabrics. Because, when somebody buys my fabric, they're putting a great deal of themselves into that. And I don't take that for granted. That's a huge ask of a person. And I want to make sure that I've earned that honor.
One thing that I've always loved about your fabric lines is you've got a story attached to every one of them. Does it start with a story, or do you mold the story around the fabrics, around the designs?
I feel like I start with a story to a degree, but it becomes clearer as I work. The story part of a collection, I mean, some of them are more specific and some of them are more loose. Like some of them are more of like an impression of a narrative that you can sort of follow. But it's really a lot about making sure it's all cohesive. And I do that through narrative. So, you're not going to end up with like a toucan and a polar bear in the same line, because that wouldn't make sense, right? So that would be a very elaborate narrative that probably includes climate change in some respect. It would have to. I mean, I usually start with one thing I want to do, like one specific thing. Sometimes it's just an animal I haven't done before, like in Moon Garden. I really wanted to see if I could make a snake cute. Like if I could make it something that wouldn't freak people out, because I am actually terrified of them, deeply terrified of snakes. I have a general rule about animals: no less than 2 legs, no more than 4, and everything in between is up for consideration. I was like, can I make this something that doesn't feel scary, that doesn't feel off-putting? And so it started with that. And then it was like, okay, so I've got this little garden snake, this little polka dot garden snake weaving its way through flowers and things, and I made it as pretty as I could. And then it's like, what would live with him? What would make sense? Like what would live around her? I guess it's more of a her. And so I kind of put myself in the environment where she lives, and I look around. I have a really, really good escapist imagination capacity. Like I can fully immerse myself in a daydream, like in a deeply clinically, like maybe terrifying kind of way. I can fully check out and check into my brain. And so I just sit there and I like look around. What do I see? And then that's what ends up in the fabric line.
You say that you draw your designs in pencil first before you bring in the color. Is that you draw the entire fabric line in black and white first before you start to add the color, or do you sneak in the color on a couple of designs first?
Everything stays in black and gray until the very end. I do color very last because color it can create a delusion, you know, to a degree. If I start working in color too early, I can fall in love with the color and not the print and not realize that the print's not working because I love the color, and vice versa. I can have a great print, but if I go into color too early, I can go, oh, this isn't working, and scrap something that could have been really good. It's just like working with the bare bones. It's like I can really see how the repeat's fitting together before I add color. I can really see the balance and the composition and I can really get into the details. Color is really distracting. I do it at the very end also because if I work on something in color, and I learned this really early when I first started, I would go straight to color because I love color. And I would do something in pink, like I'd be working in pink the whole time, but I'd have to make an alternate colorway for that piece for production reasons. You can get more bang for your buck the more colorways you do, and it keeps the fabric inexpensive and all of that stuff. A lot of businessy background reasons for that. If I would try to do that pink piece in blue, it would never look right because I had only ever seen it in that color, and I'd seen it in that color for so long that I now can't see it in any other color. So it's really a hindrance to the whole process for me to dive into color too soon, because color is the thing that actually sells the fabric. You don't cross a quilt shop to a shelf on the other side of the store because of this really great line work or because of a really great detail in it. You don't see that. You see color first. So that is the hands down most crucial element. And it's easy to get lost in that and not shore up the foundation first. So it's super important to me to make sure that the foundation, that when they do get up close, there's something worth crossing a quilt shop for, aside from just the color. So I do that last. And I spend just as much time on color as I do on the drawing itself. So if I take a week and a half, 2 weeks, maybe sometimes even a month to draw a single piece, I will spend a month doing the color. I mean, I tinker and tinker and tinker until that balance feels just right.
So just going back to this flamingo print here, do you work in layers? Like, do you know ahead of time that you're going to have, I don't know how many colors you got in here.
18.
18. So do you draw those layers first and then color it in, or do you just start tinkering and then
I draw those layers first? So I do work in layers. The reason I have to work in layers, I don't necessarily need to because they flatten all that down for production, but I work in layers because I have to take that artwork and also make it into an embroidery file, which functions totally different. Make it into ribbon artwork for Renaissance or whatever. I have to use it and I'll have to pull things out of it. So it's important to keep it in pieces because it makes it easier for other things. And yeah, I mean, once I send it off, they just flatten that whole thing down and never look at the layers. It's really just for me so that I can manipulate it later. And then in terms of color, yeah, I mean, the color kind of all works in layers also, because I have to keep track of what's printing on top of what, so I know where I'm going to run into trouble. I can sort of cut off some trouble if I'm being really precise about the layers that I'm working in. The trickiest is always putting sort of opposite colors next to each other, or like orange and blue next to each other is really hard because when they cross, they make a little brown halo, where they overlap each other because ink is transparent. So I can head those things off and call out for opaque inks in certain parts, or I can use my knowledge of the technology of printing to sort of head off some of the trouble down the road. Because my goal is always to get it right the first time. So when I get my swatches in, I'm always trying to have those swatches come in right the first time, because it cuts down costs for free spirit. It also gets me my fabric a lot faster. Every time I have to make a change, it sets back the period where I can get my advanced yardage to make samples by 6 to 12 weeks. So I want to make as few changes as humanly possible. And so I try to do as much of the work up front as I can to create less work down the road.
That sounds like a lot of skill that you wouldn't walk in the door with. Like you must have been learning all this with every collection.
Totally accumulated this over time. I mean, that's like I was saying earlier, it's experience. Like I didn't know any of this when I started. I mean, I barely knew that fabric design was an actual occupation when I started. I only knew 2 fabric designers that I could, like, not personally, but that I could call out by name, you know? And so a lot of it was learned along the way. And early in my career, actually, after my first 2 fabric collections, I actually worked at Moda's offices for about 1.5 years to have a job for one. I needed income, but also I learned so much there. I mean, that was probably some of the most invaluable experience in my career because I actually got to see things happening and how changes influence the fabric and how it comes out. And I learned from some, really incredible teachers there. There are some brilliant people at Moda that I was really lucky to get to work with.
How do you decide when you're going to do your fabric a couple of different colorways? Like no fabric collection ever seems to be, okay, this is the blue way and lining up perfectly with the pink way and the green way. There's always a flip in value in one of them, or there's like 5 different choices and you do 4 of this one and a different 4 in this one and a different 4 in this one. Is that a formula by the fabric companies, or is that a total design choice from the designer?
It's really funny because I actually try not to value change across colorways. So if it's dark in one, it stays dark in the other, because that actually solves a lot of printing issues down the road. In Moon Garden, let's say the hissy print, the snake print in Moon Garden, both backgrounds are dark because I had so many colors laying on top of it that if I switch the value of the ground, we would actually have to have 2 separate sets of screens for that print, which negates the whole reason of having 2 colorways in the first place, which is to break up the print run. But that's not how everyone does it. So there is not a formula. I mean, I have other friends who are fabric designers who always change the ground value, like by rule, like that's their way of doing it. So no, there's no rule. When I'm coloring a fabric collection, it's a little tricky because I tend to max out the colors on everything. It's really easy to take a 2-color print and do it in a lot of different 2 colors. It's really hard to take an 18-color print and actually make it look different. I tend to sort of reverse the warmth and the cool, is kind of how I approach it. So if this has a purple flower in one print, I won't make it usually a blue flower. I'll make it a yellow flower, an orange flower, pink flower, like something really different than the purple. So a lot of times my 2 different colorways actually use a lot of the same colors, but just in reverse. So that's kind of one of my sort of mechanics of coloring. But I want to make sure that they look different enough. That's always my goal, because there's no reason to make 2 fabrics that look kind of similar. So if I start with one thing and I'm using peaches and oranges and pinks, I'm going to try and use cooler colors on the other one to create a difference, so that even if you have the same 2 prints in a quilt, they won't look the same. They'll have sort of they'll catch you in a different way. But I always start with the main prints with all the colors first, and then all the other prints in that pull from that palette. That determines the palette of that colorway. So if I have an 18-color print, which is generally your maximum amount of colors you can have in a traditionally printed fabric, I will start there, get that one exactly right in each colorway, and then start bleeding those colors down into the other pieces. If it's all purples with an accent of orange, the next print will be orange with an accent of purple, and like it'll kind of bleed down that way. So I try to make them connect, but in a way that doesn't feel like you bought it in a set. That's always kind of my main goal. I don't want it to feel like, you know how like you can go to the store and buy a bed in a bag that has the sheets and the comforter and all those things, which are really convenient and wonderful, but I don't want my fabric lines to feel that way. I want them to feel, I want you to be able to make a quilt out of them that all goes together, but feels like you made these choices yourself. It feels like you collected things from a lot of different places. So it doesn't feel so like everything's the same color and it came in a box, you know?
Is there one color that you don't use?
Brown. Never use it. Never have. Actually, that's not true. Some of my Moda collections had brown in them in the early days, and a lot of that was not my choice. I have never chosen brown to go into a fabric. In the early days, choices were made for me, which makes perfect sense. I had no history, but as my confidence grew and I started making more of my own color choices, I've never used brown.
I'm wanting to make a video of what to do with colors that look like poop.
Yeah. I mean,
urine, those urine, barfy. What do you do with those colors?
I don't know. I mean, I've used colors that feel that are neutral for sure, but they'll either be more yellow or more purple. Like if I use a brown, it's going to be more of a terracotta. It's going to have more orange in it. And so some people might think it's brown, but if you actually pulled the color out and saw a huge swatch of it, you'd be like, oh gosh, that's orange. It's just next to some of my really, really bright colors, things can dull down sometimes. And I use that to my advantage. I know it's doing that. But yeah, that's just the one color I almost never use. Right now, I'm trying to build more yellow into my collections because I realized I don't use that color very much. I definitely have like go-tos and colors that I don't quite know how to work with. For a while, it was purple. I didn't know how to work with purple, never used it. So I really started focusing on it. And now I'm like, okay, I got to back up on purple. I use it too much because I was so focused on it for a while, trying to put more of it into my collections. Now it's yellow.
But that purple that you've used at the background for your snake design is absolutely gorgeous.
It's actually pulled from a swatch of my mom's living room at a living room we had when I was growing up. She had this deep, it was like an eggplant aubergine living room. And it was so epic and so unexpected, and it was super classy. Like, I don't know how she does it. She has a knack with those kind of things, but I'm like, Mom, do you still have a paint swatch from that purple living room that we had a long time ago? She's like, yeah, I do. And so that's actually the purple from my childhood living room.
So you've called it Mom's living room?
Mom's living room purple. Yeah.
When do you get to use fabrics that are not your own?
That's funny. I used to use fabrics that were not my own a lot. And I have a pretty decent collection of fabrics that I like. I mean, I've gone and like way overpaid for them, on eBay or Etsy or whatever, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that Heather Ross print, I must have that, A while ago, I want to say like maybe 5 years ago, I made a quilt just for myself. So I make a lot of quilts that are just for myself that aren't for business or work or promotional purposes, because I genuinely love quilting. It's why I don't design wallpaper or dishes or whatever. Like, I'm a quilter through and through. And I wanted to make a quilt out of all these fabrics that I had collected. And so I made a whole quilt out of like Liberty of London, oak shot cottons. It was beautiful. And I had zero emotional connection to it. And I was really surprised by it. It was gorgeous, but I felt nothing for it. And I spent a lot of time on it. And that's when I realized that I actually prefer using my own fabrics. And so now these days, I almost never use something that's not mine. And I just feel like more ownership over the quilts. I feel more connected to the quilts that use my fabric. I mean, it's nice that I genuinely like my own product. I mean, that's lovely. But so now I have all these fabrics that I can't let go of. Maybe someday I'll use them, but for now I just like having them. So I'll use like Kaufman or Moda or Kaif's wovens for backgrounds and sashings and stuff is really cool. So if I do use a fabric that isn't mine, it's something I don't make. If I'm using a print, it's pretty much going to be mine.
So how many quilts do you make a year?
It used to be a lot more. I am sort of making more complicated quilts these days, so a little like less of them, but probably 20, 25. I always have at least one very long-term project on the board. English paper piecing. Right now I'm trying to learn applique. I know applique, but I don't know applique. It's kind of my weakest technique. So I bought the most complicated applique project I could find and I'm working my way through it. And I feel like if I'm not decent at applique by the end of this thing, then I never will be. So that's my long-term project right now. And then English paper piecing constantly. So I always have one or two very, very long-term, like year plus long quilts that I'm working on by hand. And then I make a lot of quilts. I have to make quilts really fast to support a fabric collection. So that's where the bulk of the machine quilts are made. And then I go on a sewing vacation. I don't know why I'm air quoting that. It is a sewing vacation, like 2 to 3 times a year, where I get together with friends and we just mad sew for like 2 weeks. And so I usually make something big and over the top in that period of time.
You've expanded into other product lines. So you've got scissors and all these, you had traveling bags, and you've got ribbons and webbing now.
Sewing machines.
How do you evaluate whether a product works for your brand?
I seek out partnering with someone to develop a product when I find I need it personally. So I am my audience. We are the same. So if I need something, other people might need it too. And usually that's true. So if I'm working with somebody, because I don't develop anything on my own, you know, I come up with ideas and then other people figure it out, which is a delightful way to work. But, you know, like with my hardware line, I went to Brewer, who I've been working with for a long time through Bernina, who I've also been working with for a long time. And I said, you know, I need a really good scissor that is beautiful, that's functional, that's sharpenable, that's specific to our community, that isn't something, you know, because I have to keep 2 sort of audiences in mind. There's the people who, the consumer who buys it and uses it, but also the shop owner who is my customer directly. And with my mom having been a shop owner, every time she would get scissors or things in her store, people would always say, oh, well, I can get that with a 50% off coupon at a chain store. And so while she had to carry it, it was very hard to sell because she couldn't compete with the chain stores and the coupons and all of that. And so I was like, we need a product that's just for us, that's beautiful and super functional. And so I partnered with Brewer on that and Famore scissors, and we came up with this really beautiful product. That's kind of how everything has gone. You know, the recent introduction of the nylon webbing that I'm working on with Renaissance ribbons, again, I called Renaissance and I was like, you know what? I don't like making fabric handles. I never make them. So I'm buying all this webbing from like seatbelt companies and, you know, like automotive places is usually where you find it. And it's not very pretty. Like it's functional and it's great, but I have a hard time finding something I really love. And I spend all this time making a bag and it's a lot of work and I love it, but then I have to stick this like gray handle on it and it's dumb. And so I just figured, so I was talking to Edith at Renaissance and I said, ribbons are woven in a lot the same way webbing is. Do you think our manufacturers could weave webbing as well? And she goes, let's ask. And so we started this webbing thing, which has been super great and hugely successful. And I finally have beautiful webbings to use on my bags. So a lot of, really not just a lot, all of my products come from a place of need. Because I actually sew, I actually use my products every day. I sew every single day. And if I find a hole in my needs, I try to fill it, you know, so there's certain parts of my needs that I don't have to fill. Like Tulip makes the best needle I've been able to find. So I have no desire to make a needle, you know, so like there's things that I think are not holes that I don't need to fill. But when I find one, I try to fill it.
Do you wish you had bought twice or maybe even 5 times the amount of playing cards that you did?
You know, what's funny is we bought 10 times the amount of playing cards that we did of the first set. And I thought, this is crazy because those special items, those I pay for myself. So I don't partner with anybody. Those are just sort of like, they're just for fun. And I know people like them and I like creating them. So we just kind of, whenever I get a bug about, oh, you know, it would be really cute. And then we produce them myself. So I was actually sweating bullets when we did those playing cards because I had never, because I had never spent that much money developing product. Playing cards are brutally expensive to make, especially custom ones. And, because it's like printing a postcard costs a certain amount of money. Imagine printing 52 of them and then putting them in a box. Like, I was totally like, my anxiety was through the roof. I'm like, we need to sell these. I'm so worried,
I didn't even get a chance. Like I think I went the next day and I thought, well,
Yeah.
I'm ordering one of these for everybody that I know. Like I was prepared to order 15 and then went, they're sold out.
Well,
You mean they're sold out?
That was actually our longest sale time we've ever had, because I think they lasted a full 24 hours, which we've never had something last a whole day. Usually they're gone in a couple hours, but we knew people love playing cards always because they're useful. It's not just a decorative item. You can do stuff with them. You can play with them, And so I made way more of those than I ever thought we'd be able to sell. So now we know. Next time we'll make more.
Next time, all these ones will be gone. So you'll have the whole market all over again. So the last 2 years have been challenging for a lot of people. And on top of that, Coats sold Free Spirit. So you've had a new mothership. How have you had to pivot in the last 2 years, deal with all this change?
I mean, those are two super separate things that don't really overlap for me. They're two separate sets of adaptation, really. I think Jaftex buying Free Spirit off of Coats actually was incredible for us, because Coats was never fully integrated into the independent quilt shop market, where Jaftex only works in the independent quilt shop market. So in that way, I think that transition was amazing because they understood our customers so much better. There were certain conversations I could stop having with management, which was great, So that has been one thing. I mean, even though that was like a crazy turmoil, I mean, I was out of work for 5 days and interviewing at every fabric company on earth, trying to get a new contract. And then Jaftex came in at the last minute and, said, will you honor your contract? And so I was like, I will play out the rest of my contract. And if this works, if it's a good partnership, then I'll renew. And because I only had like 6 months left of my contract with Coats. So I honored the contract, played it out, and we ended up, I think, working out really well. So I just stayed, which most of us did. And so that was one thing. Pivoting from the pandemic, that was a whole other ball of wax, because I was actually on a teaching trip when the pandemic hit the States in a big way. I was teaching on a cruise ship in the Caribbean. And we were at dinner. It was my mom's birthday. She was on the cruise with me as like a birthday trip. And we were sitting at dinner on a cruise ship in the Caribbean with a bunch of students. And the waiter came by and said, you guys all need to go to your rooms and pack. We're turning around and ending this trip now. The United States is about to like close its doors and we want to make sure everybody gets home. And we were like, what? So I was supposed to be on the ship for a whole nother 10 days, I think. And so that all got shut down. We went home, and then I got home and I was like, okay, I've spent the last 8 years traveling well over half of the year, teaching, lecturing. And that was my main source of promotion. That's how I would reach people. And I mean, we had social media and everything, of course, but I like to connect directly, like I like to talk about the work and be in front of people and handle it with them, And so I was like, well, how am I going to reach people if I'm not out there? Like if I'm not in front of people? And that's when Cameron decided we should do these weekly videos. And I was like, let's give it a shot. And it's ended up being amazing because I can talk to so many more people all at once. But that was probably the biggest pivot for us, is trying to figure out how to replace this major component of our business, which was traveling all the time and all over the world. I mean, it wasn't just local stuff. We were everywhere all the time. And that was tough. That was scary because I didn't know what that meant, That's what I had leaned on for so long as my way of method of reaching people, that I didn't know how this was all going to play out.
It was a scary time. On the other foot, it was like we've been training for it for so long.
Yeah.
we all had the stash of fabrics. It was, and we saw people bring out projects that were 5, 10, 20 years old and get them done and out the door, as well as all the mask making. And I mean, the thousands and thousands of people that came to quilting, the discovery of how important a hobby is.
Yeah. I think it kept a lot of people sane. I think it kept me sane. I'm lucky enough to live in the country, basically. It's a suburb, but it's very country-ish. Especially when you're from LA, it's very country, where we've got space to sort of move around without being in a public area. And, I have a backyard I can go into and things like that. So I felt really, really lucky during that time, but it doesn't change. There's something psychological that happens no matter what your circumstances are about being contained. Mm-hmm. And there's something that sort of fries your nerves about that, no matter what. And I think for a lot of us who have been quilters and hobby sewers and stuff like that for years, we used that to keep us sane, to like have some sort of accomplishment when you feel like you're not doing anything. You're not so busy with your life, and we get so used to that being busy all the time that becomes how we operate. And then you take that all away very suddenly without any transition. And you're just like, well, what do I do with myself? And so I think a lot of us like dove back into the things we love and found a lot of joy and sanity in that. And I think that was really important for keeping us together. And all the new people that came to it, like I was so excited. I was like, oh, you finally arrived. Congratulations. This is going to be great.
Did Cameron ever take up quilting?
No, but he knows more about quilting than any 30-year-old man should. I will say that. He knows all the designers and all the patterns. He's like, oh, is that a by Annie pattern? I'm like, well, yes, it is, Cameron. And yeah, no, he knows a lot about quilting. He has, in a pinch, had to help me finish some things before it. And I discovered that he's actually a really good English paper piecing.
My husband would glue gun it.
Yeah. Well, I needed help. It was a few years ago to finish. It was an EPP quilt that had to be done for Quilt Market, and we got in the fabric really late. And I was like, you have to sew this. I need you to sew with me. I will never be like, as fast as I can hand sew, I cannot finish this in like 9 days. So we made an entire English paper piece quilt. It wasn't huge, but it was good size in 9 days, and got it to the quilter on time. And it was him. Him and I sitting in front of the TV, just like day in and day out. And he goes, this is horrible. It's so hard on your hands. I'm like, oh, you just don't have calluses yet. You just wait. He's like, I don't want the calluses for this. It was funny, but he's actually quite adept at it. I was impressed.
Just about the fabric, like there's this timeline between you approving the fabric gets printed. I guess there's a first run to give you some advanced fabric, mm-hmm. and then the fabric line comes up. And in that little span of time, you've got to produce quilts and
bags, everything.
And you also have some people that make quilts.
I used to make everything myself. Now I just make the main quilt myself and all the bags. And then Free Spirit actually has people make some stuff for them, and then they send it to me and I show it in the videos. I don't have anyone who sews for me directly. If I'm going to make something, I make it myself.
And how much time is that? That's pretty fast to turn around a quilt.
It's weeks at best. If I'm really on the ball and I get that line approved quickly, I might get it in with like 6 weeks would be the most amount of time I would have to work on something. I also have to get it to Angela so that she can quilt it, which I have to factor into my timeline. So I usually hit the ground running on the quilt so I can get that to her. And then I move on to the things I can finish myself, like the bags and the accessories. It's 6 weeks at best. I've had as little as 7 days to make everything. Angela and I have produced an alarming amount of quilts in less than 2 weeks at various times in our careers, where I would actually finish sewing them in her quilting room so that they could come right off the machine onto her long arm. We've had to do that before. We've done midnight runs back and forth to each other's houses to pick up and drop off to make sure things. I have bound many quilts in the back of a car on the way to a trade show. I think all of us in the industry can have those stories. I mean, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do.
Does your mom make any quilts?
She does. Yeah, she does. She is, I call her the best rogue quilter. Like, she always starts with a pattern, but it never looks like that pattern when it's done. She gets like 25% into a pattern and goes, I'm over this, and just starts taking the fabric and sewing like all willy-nilly. And she makes the coolest sort of improv quilts. Like, they're very sophisticated, but that's where she really shines.
And my last question for you, what is your favorite quilt? If your house was burning down, what is the quilt that you would grab on the way out the door?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. I mean, it's usually whatever the newest one is, but right now my favorite quilt is one that I just finished out of Tiny Beast that I made on vacation. That's almost, my vacation sewing quilts are always like the ones I love the most. I think it's because I make them with people I love. You know, like, that's my favorite time of the year. But I just finished one that was all like Ohio stars, like little Ohio stars. And then,
is that the one that says St. Joseph? And
yeah, I appliqued. It says St. Joseph, Missouri, La Crosse, Wisconsin, Tula Pink 2022. I really love that one right now.
That is a very clever quilt. You did a great job on that one.
Thank you. It was so much fun to make because the combos I made as I went. So I cut a whole bunch of triangles, squared, like all the pieces. And then I just pick up a piece, figure out which star points would go on, which background, like, as I went. And then it got more fun as I started running out of colors because I had to be more and more clever about what I put together. It was a real study in color combinations that led to some really unexpected pairings that I actually used in my upcoming lines. I was like, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought to put those together, but I really like it. So those are coming up in future fabric collections. If you ask me at any moment in time, it'll be something different though. If I lined them all up, I'd be hard pressed. My La Passacaglia is one that I would want to save in a fire because that took me 4 years to make, literally 4 years to make. And so some I love because of just the visual quality of them. Some I love because of the process of making them. Some I love because they just took an incredible amount of time. Like that La Paz quilt took ages to make. It was so intense. Well, when you take a pattern that's like 50 by 60 and blow it up to 120 by 130 inches, it takes a lot longer than you think it would.
Well, I'm at the end of a 5-year hand piecing project. Mm-hmm. It's the new hexagon by Katya Marek.
Okay.
And I actually just bought Tiny Beasts today in the blue lime way going, okay, that is the one fabric I need to complete that last block so I can get that done.
Tiny Beast is so killer for English paper piecing. I mean, that was a lot of my thought too. It's like, just little prints that you can just pull a million different things out of. I love that about a print.
Well, you deliver on those prints. So how do people find you? I know that's kind of silly. So many people know who you are, but how do people find you?
I mean, the most up-to-date, obviously I have a website, tulapink.com, which is really great. Like, it kind of does two things. It's for retailers to see what's coming out, but it's also for the collector so that they can keep track of their archive. So we keep a large archive of past work on there, specifically for people who collect my fabric so they can see everything that's available or that has been available. But up-to-date information is always going to be Instagram and Facebook. Instagram specifically, it's a lot more immediate. So everything we post, that's like real time what's going on at all times. And we spend a lot of time on social media just making sure everybody has all the information.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been
Thank you.
delightful speaking to you. If you had the time, I have a whole other list of questions I could ask you.
We will go follow up then.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Tula Pink. Now I know how much effort and experience is behind your designs. I love them all the more. If you have yet to follow her on Instagram or Facebook, I'll leave her links in the notes below. Her weekly Tula Tuesday video is where you'll find all the latest information on everything Tula and any upcoming special releases. Next up on Karen's Quilt Circle is Brandon Wolf, and we will be talking about the joys and challenges about being a neurodiverse quilter. You don't want to miss it, so be sure to subscribe. Next time you're in your sewing room, be sure to have Karen's Quilt Circle playing in the background. I have interviewed so many amazing quilters on this show. Let one inspire you. And check out last week's video on quilt labels. So take care, and I'll see you next time.